All right. Well, welcome to QCraft Thin Slides for All. My name is Dr. Steve McGriff, and I've got Valerie Sun on the moderator side of this session. Welcome to Bold 2020. Let's move this into gear. We want to talk about thin slides, which we call a QCraft, but could be also called an EduProtocol. But hold on a second. Let me give you a little quick introduction to the nature of bold as I see it through my eyes. So here we go. Now that would be bold, to be that close to that bowl while it's looking at you while you're holding the camera. Craziness. What about writing it with one hand? You've heard us talk about that slogan and that logo. Heck, that's a pretty hard thing to do. But what a wild and crazy way to have a fun ride. Well, seems like it's fun. And what if we went motorcyclish with one hand? Now there's a crazy thing. Now all you moms out there, you know this is exactly the last thing you want your husbands and your sons to be doing. But man, that looks like crazy wicked fun. Ooh, here's a guy with an extreme sense of bold confidence. All right, back to Thin Slides. Thin Slides for All. There's the tiny URL to get you to the slide deck. And that's funny, I'm letting you into the slide deck right here, but then I quickly want to take you back out to get here. I'd love for you to go here and start this activity. I want to know about you. I would like you to participate and share a little bit of yourself by going out to tinyurl.com/bold-about-me and begin to, well, follow the instructions that are there. And let's see how that goes. And I'm going to jump over to that particular slide deck and take a look at what it is that you are doing. We're going to do this for about 2-3 minutes. So I'll join you there. Put this into presentation mode and take a quick look. All right. This is building an about me. And we can see a little bit. Well, I think that's a flag of Puerto Rico. And so Janine is telling us something about the association of her name to that particular flag. Let me take a look at, so here were the instructions to choose a blank slide in the deck, add your name, and add one image. Got about 2 minutes. Don't mess with other people's slides, which really means don't change the background for the entire deck, and then everybody has to live with the background you chose until we figure out how to undo it. There's Nora. So I won't go through all of these slides, so let me escape this. Let me turn on view to grid view, and then you could get a quick overview of all of the slides that are currently being worked on. Or welcome to Thin. This, my friends, is a thin slide. It's an about me thin slide. It's a very simple, easy way to have students introduce themselves into a course context. This is the nature of what this EduProtocol is about. This is a rockin' awesome way to get students to talk to one another through visual terms and through the way that they write about themselves. Is there a word? You know, I asked you to put your name here, but you could ask the students to come up with a descriptive word to go with a picture. The picture doesn't have to be of them, as we can see in these examples. Some of you used your picture, some of you used other visual representations of yourselves. The power that is behind this is that even just looking at the examples of what's going on in the thin slides right there, in the about me, is you start to capture the essence of someone's personality and you get to see their name. We're going to dig a little bit deeper in what else is going on in these particular slides. One of the keys of doing this is you don't want to give students too much time because they'll start looking up every typeface in the world that they could possibly use. They'll search forever to find an image and never get the project done. So keep the time frame short. So in that vein, I'm going to bring us out of this particular activity, though I'm sure you know how to multitask. You can continue building on your About Me slide if you wish. I'm going to jump back to our presentation and talk to you a little bit more about how thin slides can be done in just a few minutes. So what I did, and so following our typical bold pattern, using the Madeline Hunter lesson plan model, I used the thin slides activity, the About Me, as the hook. That was the opening part of the anticipatory set. I didn't give you any instruction in thin slides. I just said, go in and do it. If learners need that kind of preparation in advance, then you should build in a class session prior to that where you show them how to use the slide presentation tool. whether it's Google Slides or something else. So I gave you what I call the cold immersion dive in. Just put everyone into the context and let them figure it out. Do something fun, do something interesting to start this whole idea. Now the content, it's not based upon any content at this point. I just wanted you to introduce yourself. So it's a great warm-up activity before you do something with academic content. We will talk more about what kinds of academic content you could put in as we go along. Because of the way that I think about instruction, I'm an instructional designer, and this slide that you are seeing has multiple levels of information in it. You can see 1 and 2 on the left-hand side, so that gives you an idea of what the anticipatory set is. But every once in a while, over there on the right-hand side, you're going to see something called the ARCS motivation model. It is a model for how you can embed motivational strategies into the lesson that you are designing. The anticipatory set is exactly the place where you want to capture the learner's attention, just like you would do for a hook to any lesson that you would like to deliver. When you get this slide deck, if you don't have it already, there are links embedded in many of these places in this slide, like this one right here. You can find out more about that motivational model. So ThinSlides, let me move ahead. If there aren't any questions at this point, we move into the purpose. Well, I am teaching you about ThinSlides. So my academic need is something like this. I would love for you to be able to communicate more visually in the materials that you create. Working in Google Slides and talking about graphic design and having you work with graphic design elements is one way for me to help you learn how to communicate visually. But I would also love for my students to present in a presentation format what it is that they are thinking in their head. Can they take the abstract, make it something visual that the rest of us can see? But you see, there's some more steps to ThinSlides that I'm about to reveal to you in a minute that make this more powerful than just creating a single visual element. This is clearly deep in the realm of visual literacy, but any content that you have your students focus on will become an important part of you addressing standards that you need to do. If you're interested in knowing, ThinSlides all by itself addresses Common Core standards, anchor standards that are listed in the orange box for language, speaking and listening, writing, and reading. I identified the ISTE standards as well. When you get this slide deck, if you're not already looking at it, peek down in the presenter notes. I basically wrote a book that's 14 pages long if you print out this slide deck with all of the presenter notes. It has information for you about the Madeline Hunter model. It has information about the workflow of using ThinSlides. It has information about the motivational strategies, and this slide in particular has that information about what the standards are just using ThinSlides. If you put your content in there, it becomes that much more rich and expressive. This is what I meant by easy entry point. It's just a slide deck with a high ceiling, depending on how you would like to approach the learning. So thank you for allowing me to drop you into the ThinSlides activity and to let you just experience it through an About Me. And you've done many About Me's, though I don't think anyone necessarily called it a ThinSlide activity. So it isn't really unique to that. By the way, it's called ThinSlides because I misunderstood something that John was explaining to me about thin slides and thick slides. This happens to me frequently when I'm talking with John Carrico. So he showed me what a thick slide was, which is a slide with a lot of text and information. And he just referenced ThinSlides, but he didn't define what it is specifically. And so I said, oh, that must mean one picture, one word on one slide. And then I took off. I just ran with it. And he looked at it and he said, McGriff, did you just rip me off? I said, no, John, it's a delightful riff on a theme that you gave me. So to help you figure this out, you can think about ThinSlides as like if students were writing a meme. They all tend to understand what a meme is. You're basically got one canvas space and you're going to put an image and a word to it. So that often helps students figure that out. And you don't have to use Google Slides. You can use any shared slide deck to make that happen. Here's the workflow and an introduction to QCraft. QCraft is what Q calls the EduProtocols as they present it to the world. And the QCraft ThinSlides protocol is available on the QCraft website. It has this workflow that you can see. Students can work solo, they can work in pairs. It's always about a shared slide deck, but if that's problematic for students to cooperatively work within a slide deck, they can work in their own slide and then you can bring it all together or ask another student to do that. One of the things you could do is you can just present an empty ThinSlides deck and not say what their students are supposed to do until the moment in time that you want them to do it. Watch the magic of what that is. You've got a ThinSlides template, but it doesn't say anywhere in that template what it is, the prompt or the information you want students to act on. You could always use the template. You could bring it out anytime and then just wait until you have all of your students' attention and then say to them, here's the prompt, and then let them run and do the work. They find the image, they write the word, they design the slide to as much time as you want. Here's the real power and the magic of what's going to happen in that ThinSlide. It is in the presentation. We didn't do presentations because we don't have enough time to really make that happen. But if I asked you to introduce yourself, you would talk from your ThinSlide. You would then tell us why you chose the image that you did to go along with who you are and your personality. Can you imagine if each student had 10 seconds to actually speak about who they are or why they did the thing they did on the slide? You would learn an awful lot about that student. This is where we address almost all the speaking and listening standards. If you have students, just do this simple activity. Very powerful for getting to know students. There's a caveat. If students are revealing something about themselves, let's start with something fun before you go to something deep, and you can't go to something deep until you've helped your students build a measure of trust. Let's pause for a second. Valerie, are there questions we should pick up from the slides or from the chat? And are there any, or someone want to ask a question before I move further?
There aren't any questions in the slide deck.
Do I just have them all memorized, mesmerized? Are they just grasping the full concept right away?
Yeah, they're digging it. Trisha actually says ThinSlides should be required for every presentation.
Oh my goodness. Can I get a quote on that? Sweet, thank you.
And you are brilliant, as Janine says.
Is this a Janine that I know really well and she already knows me? Feed Steve's ego and he can run for miles? Or is my wife posing as Janine?
I don't know.
In the Madeline Hunter model and when using ThinSlides, so I took you into ThinSlides and I just kind of threw you into the deep end or the cold end of the water, however you want to think about that analogy. Here's what you do when you provide guided practice using ThinSlides for whatever content you want. Okay, you've got two levels. You're doing a ThinSlides, you got to help students understand ThinSlides until they mastered it after a few reps. But then there's the content. Whichever way you're trying to coach them, make sure that in the guided practice, you're in there with them. You're talking to them. Hey, that was really clever. I really like this idea that you're developing in that slide. I wonder if you tried this. I wonder what it would look like if you changed that color or if you added a different graphic. The first time that you do this, you may wish to just be quiet and not say anything, but that second time, that third time, that fourth time, you can use the opportunities of coaching while walking around. So if you're present with your students, walk the room, take a look at what they're doing. If they're totally online, do the grid view or the gallery view in Google Slides, and then you can see how it's developing in real time. And use your voice or type notes into the slide, and give feedback to the students to encourage them, to inspire them in what they're doing. They're in a creative endeavor, so inspire their creativity. That would be a good way to do guided practice. What would an EduProtocol be if we didn't rock and roll twice? So let's try a different version of a thin slide. And this one is about Tom Sawyer. I think I pulled down the Tom Sawyer vocabulary words from a 5th grade vocabulary list, and I put them into a thin slide. Let me change over to that deck and wait for you to come in. There's more than enough slides. There's 125 slides in this deck. There are 37 words or so, so I just repeated the words a number of times. So find an empty slide with a word on it that you like, and find a visual graphic that goes with it. I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and while you're thinking about that, let me mess with you. Let me keep talking to you about what's going on here. This idea for putting the vocabulary word on the slide was introduced to me the first time that I ever talked about thin slides. I said, that's a fantastic idea. Give the kid the words in the first place, build a vocabulary deck as a warm-up exercise for a book that you're going to read, and then ask the students to visualize that. Can you imagine what an amazing preparation that would be for reading a book like Island of the Blue Dolphins? I see my Union School District friends in the chat. I know that they'll respond well to that. They inspired me to think about some of the texts that are read in elementary school and how we build vocabulary. Why not give them a thin slides deck that already has the words you want them to know? Each student gets a chance to visualize the word. Now you have a verbal visual dictionary that becomes an artifact for further learning. You could think of it as a pretest, as a warm-up exercise. Then you could come back to it at the end after you've read the book. You can ask the students to do the activity again, and from the research viewpoint, you want to look at the pre and the post and see what change happened with the students' understanding and the visualization of the information in the book now that they've read it and been engrossed in the story. And you could tell by my voice I'm getting really excited about this idea, because it wasn't mine. It was shared by teachers who saw the inspiration of what thin slides could do, and I thought I would introduce it to you. Let's take a look. What are you all doing with Tom Sawyer words? So I go to grid view. Oh, let's take a look at accoutrements. I remember I learned what the word accoutrements means from reading Tom Sawyer. I'm not sure that's what I thought accoutrements mean, but I love the picture. Let me find another one. Cogitating, nicely done. Oh, great little graphic image for the ruffian. And you can see that I am trying to model what you might do if you're looking at your student slides as you are showing them. Beautiful illustration of caricature, exactly right. Great description. That would stick in any student's mind for a very long time. Let me find one more, and then I will transition out. Would anyone argue about laggard and then the snail? That is a very attractive snail picture, by the way. So you get the idea of how you can use thin slides to build a vocabulary deck. Oh, we happen to be looking at English language arts right now. You could do this for science. You could do this for math terminology, math concepts, geometry. So tell me in the chat, is there any subject that you could not visualize with a vocabulary deck like thin slides? If you can think of one, put it in the chat. I see people are pointing out world history for sure, geography for sure, landscapes, ecosystems, oceanography, biology. I'm going to flip back over to our slide presentation. Valerie, I see Valerie's concentrating really hard on the chat. Let's pause for a moment. How are we doing? Are there questions, or do I need to slow down? Do I need to speed up? That could be interesting. Doing okay?
Mm-hmm. You're good.
All right. Modeling. One of the standard modeling practices that you could use for any lesson, but works particularly well for thin slides, if you need to teach the Google Slide skills, do a we do, you do. Work on it together with the students and then let them do it on their own. You can drop in different types of content as you're going along. I wouldn't really worry about trying to master how to do a Google slide. That will come naturally to students, and they'll whisper to each other. they will work with their elbow partners and they will figure out all the tips and tricks of how to make Google Slides do all kinds of things. Help them focus on the content and what connections you want them to make when they're putting that information in the slide. Think about the nature of a thin slide with one image and one word. I am telling you, that is very concise writing of very complex ideas. And the power is in the simplicity. The power is in the minimalistic nature of that. When you want students to edit copy, get it down to one word and one image, or maybe just a short phrase and an image. You force them to get their thinking down to a very precise level. Just saying, it's kind of powerful in the way that works. On the surface, this looks like a very low DOK kind of exercise, but I think if you keep working with this idea, as you put in higher level types of content, as you ask students to build their own thin slides as a group, you have now raised the DOK level to a much higher, well above 2, when you have students create the thin slides deck on vocabulary for a content area that they are going to learn. They'll take ownership of that. They'll build that deck. They'll have great pictures. They'll pull out the keywords, or you could give them the keywords and then say, build it. If you have English language learners in your group, one of the effective strategies for doing something like this is to front load them with the words or the concepts before the class activity unfolds so that they have a bit of a head start. Keep in mind that time is important. Students will lose themselves in finding typefaces and finding graphic images and trying to make things look cool and clever. Don't give them that much time. Cut them short. Remember, if you do this repetitiously, you keep doing this, they will always have opportunities to come back to it. So it's not a big deal if you cut their time off too short. Modeling is also a wonderful opportunity to use one of the steps of the ARCS motivation model, which is to build confidence in your learners. Modeling is a way for you to speak back to your students as they're putting their ideas together. And there's much more information about that in the presenter notes for this particular slide, as well as every one of those graphic images to the left-hand side about graphic design links connects to websites related to graphic design techniques that I think are good for teachers, plus the notes below have a lot of rich content in it as well. Checking for understanding. You recognize that I was checking for understanding at various points in this presentation, which I highly encourage you to do as well. But I did not want to neglect that when using thin slides, there is a very specific point at which you are checking for understanding. And that comes in when you're listening to the student's presentation of their slides. After you've given them a few reps and you give them some time to work with thin slides, then you might want to you start dropping in that content, and you know that you really want to turn this into a learning activity. Come up with a simple rubric like this one. Just, what is that, 10, what do you got, 40 points running there? Then just give them some points for artistic impression. Remember that they're going to speak, so give them some points for their speaking skills. And then overall, what's the total, I made it an even simpler scale. I only put 20 points total. I used to have much more elaborate rubrics, I have to admit. I'm a rubric hound, and I love them, and I make them complex. I simplified it. Put in a few simple scales, make it easy to achieve, cover what you want to cover. You can add the content components as well. That rubric just addresses building a thin slide. When you give feedback to your students, you're helping to increase their sense of satisfaction in what they're doing. Thin slides gives you an opportunity to do that at every particular stage in which students are working on it. Give them the sense that they're really accomplishing something, that their ideas are working well, that their thinking is really coming in line with what you're asking them. In the Tom Sawyer example, you could give more descriptive illustrations of what goes on in the book, whatever chapter you might be in, or if it's before they've read it, you can give them teasers and hints about some of the exciting things and the fantastic quotes that Mark Twain puts in there.
Oops.
Independent practice. So be sure to add in the repetitions so that students can actually have time to practice, and they get so familiar with the protocol that all you have to do is say ThinSlides. They'll know where to find the deck, and they'll just wait for you to give them the prompt on what you would like them to do. This is how we get to mastery. Bringing this in towards the close of our time. Closure is a part of the Madeline Hunter model. Long conversations with Robin Hunter, her son, who John and I had the privilege of interviewing yesterday in a session, plus long conversations with John as he started to use this model for BOLD. He said, Steve, look, Madeline never liked closure. She resented having to put that into the model. She didn't believe it was necessary because what it did was gave a false sense that the lesson and the learning stops. Madeline never wanted the learning to stop. But she listened to her academic colleagues at UCLA and added the 8th step. Oh, it's called an element. It's not a step. Closure. Let's think about it differently. What if we looked at it as an iteration or as a launching pad for the next things that students might do? If you need to bring your lesson, in a sense, to stop working on the lesson, anytime the student stands up to speak about their ThinSlide, in essence, they are bringing that particular activity to a close. What I encourage you to do is once everyone, the students have had a chance to talk about their ThinSlide, then you might inspire them to think about what is the next part of the learning and to move them forward into another EduProtocol or into a reading or into another part of your curriculum that helps elaborate on the content that you chose to pour into your ThinSlide. With that thought in mind, let me pause and check and see if any of you have any questions.
There were some questions as to how this would work in a classroom, if we would give a bit.ly to the whole class, or if we could assign it to a Google Classroom.
Oh, okay. It's a Google slide deck, so you could push this out through Google Classroom, but the idea is it's still a shared slide deck, so everyone's contributions are contained in one space. Or you could do what I did, was I shared a short URL with you, and then you accessed it.
There was also a question about how do we incorporate wait time for students who are intimidated by the rapid nature of this activity.
So the pacing then, the question is, how do you moderate the pacing? Like 2 or 3 minutes is too short of a time. It creates tension and causes students to feel distressed, that kind of thing.
And so if I use Canvas, would I attach a slide deck to Canvas?
Canvas, my new best friend. You can do Google Drive integration in Canvas and then share out that one slide deck.
And you know what's really cool? If you're a Nearpod user, I can embed this into Nearpod as well, and my students work directly in Nearpod on that specific deck. There was
Great
also
ideas.
a question about organization in terms of who works on which slide. And so I had shared in the chat that for my middle school students, I actually gave them numbers as they were coming in, so then they knew which slide to work on, so there isn't a fight over it. But for my
good point.
elementary school students, they knew their class numbers, so they worked on the slides that they're numbered for, except for number 1 and number 2. They usually had the last 2 slides.
Yes. When I have done this BOLD workshop live, I would hand participants walking in the door a number just to expedite this. So you're recognizing that the management of the activity is really the same as the management of any activity that you would do in your classroom. I picked up on that question about the pacing. So moderate the pacing so that it fits your students. I am approaching what I am speaking about with a great sense of speed and urgency because of the timing. I speak about using ThinSlides in a very rapid manner, but just like the Madeline Hunter model, you need to remix or modify that recipe and that pacing so that it can work for you and your students. Whatever the short time frame is, if it means 5 minutes is recognized as a short time frame versus anything else that students might do, then that might be exactly what you need. Other questions or comments before I move into resources? It's hard to follow the stream of chat. Suzanne is asking a question I think I can answer, but I bet you can too, Valerie.
I think Canvas does need to be purchased by the school or the district.
Yeah, it's a major learning management system.
And wouldn't this work well with Padlet? I think so.
You could do this in Padlet, and students could see what one another is doing. Melinda's asking about students with IEPs. Yes, give them the vocabulary words ahead of time. So ELLs, IEP students, scaffold the experience, because it's all about the learning. It's all about the experience with the content. It's about the visualization and the words coming together in a way that makes meaning. I didn't even begin to address the learning theory behind, Pavio's dual coding of visual and verbal information being combined in the memory banks to reinforce our ability to recall information. If I say carrot, you hear the word and you think of the image immediately. If I showed you the picture, you would think of the word immediately because it's been ingrained in that way. This is what ThinSlides can introduce on a cognitive science level. And ABC book, perfect. Looking at our time and wanting to leave more room for open-ended questions, I would like to show you the last few slides to bring our time to a continuation of what you might be interested in doing later. Madeline would be proud of me. I didn't say closure. Providing you some resources and some links to information that might be helpful to you. The template for ThinSlides, that is a link. There's the 2 images of the books. I believe each book is a link to the Amazon website where you could find out more about that, but many of those resources are available about EduProtocols online and on Twitter. I've written a white paper about the ARCS model. You can click that link to find it. And there's the link to QCraft as well. But you notice that I put Bloom's taxonomy in here. Bloom's taxonomy is a rich collection of the verbs at the low or the high end of thinking skills that you may wish to consider when you are asking your students to do any one of these activities. I use it as an instructional designer to help me create objectives that get to the higher levels of learning for my students. So I provided links to 3 resources or 4 resources that I think might be useful to you. A little bit, there's me, Steve, the instructional designer. I work for Q. I've been tagged as the QCraft curriculum designer, but I didn't design the QCraft. I just kind of designed some visual representations and explanations of it. Valerie is just a great colleague in our Q Higher Education Learning Network, and she's a good friend. And we work together to try to figure out how do we take the stuff that we know from learning theory and make it real and relevant for our K-12 teachers in Q. That's kind of what rocks our world, and we'd love to be able to answer your questions anytime in the future that you should have them. Feel free to reach out to us. For BOLD this year, we want to make sure that if you need proof that you were here hanging out with Steve on ThinSlides, of course, I redesigned that Freyer model, Val, because you know that I would do it. You knew that, right?
I did.
And I had to change this slide too, because it really, sorry, graphic design guy. So if you want the Freyer slide that is kind of pictured, yeah, there it is. See, I changed it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want credit, you can get this particular Freyer from that link where it says bit.ly/bold credit. And then you submit your Freyer, you submit your completed Freyer to that website, and John and Kim Vogie will take a look at it and give you the stamp of approval and send it and give it back to you. And with that, I think we are into the after party. How you doing, Val?
Great. Penny had a great question about
Yes.
letting second graders search directly in Google for pictures.
Aha. It gets tricky.
It does get tricky. And as an early elementary school teacher, I generally found a bunch of pictures for my students that I think they would be interested in the theme that we're working in.
Yes.
And so I give them access to a drive folder of like 100 or so pictures that they could select from. And it also helps them to not spend forever and ever searching for the right picture. And I learned this the hard way while looking for wild animals such as cougars and cheetahs in front of my students. Not a good idea. So if you're looking for wild animals, make sure you put in National Geographic or
Yes.
Nat Geo cougar sexy animals that you don't want them to have.
So, Valerie, the idea of creating a collection of images that you curated that students could go to is really protective and much better to guide learners when you don't want to have to teach them about, cyber citizenship and safety online. Just curate the collection in advance and just have lots of pictures and lots of imagery available that students could explore without getting lost. And it's all safe because you did it in advance. You could even oh my goodness, you could set those up in a slide deck, turn it into gallery view, and then they could.
Zenaida, which bit.ly would you like to have?
You can unmute yourself if you would like to add your voice to the conversation, the discussion. Valerie and I are here for a couple more minutes before we need to release the room.
Hi, I'm Allie Armstrong. Can I ask a question? Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for incredibly. Hello, whoever's sweet child just spoke. So I am tech challenged in every way. I have no idea how to set this fantastic ThinSlides up. I have 25 different ideas of how I could use it with my seniors in economics and American government. I love it as an icebreaker, but I also like the idea that I could use the complexity of it to have kids respond, perhaps to look at a graphic analysis of something as simple as a change in supply and demand and what happens if this curve shifts. I have all these different ideas, but honestly, I'm an excellent classroom teacher and a horrible online teacher. And I feel that 99% of the people coming to the BOLD seminar, you're just going like this and everybody gets what you're talking about. And I'm writing gallery view, Canvas, Padlet, Frayer. This is so much computer tech jargon that somebody tech challenged like me has got to have a starting point. I made my first hyperdoc. I learned how to do that. Woo!
Yes!
But that's not what I want to do. I want to do what you just did. And I frankly was just hitting the controls and trying to figure out how can I make a slide and throw an image in here. And I couldn't even, everything was locked up. I was like, I don't know what to punch or click. Anyway, sorry to express all this frustration to all of you, intelligent tech people.
Allie, thank you so much. There's two things. You demonstrated extraordinary courage to talk with us, to express the frustration that we know teachers feel. The whole reason I do what I do is because I know teachers who have that same feeling as you do. When I heard this for the first time, I recognized I have a gift and a talent of working with teachers who are frustrated with technology. I need to stay because Allie's going to need me at some time in the future. You can call me anytime. I'll spend 30 minutes, I'll spend an hour with you. I will walk you through the page. I wrote that workflow just for you. And if the complexities of the way that it looks just starts to be overwhelming, we'll chunk it, we'll break it down.
It's not the complexity, it's that I'm auditory, I'm visual, but mostly I got to touch my screen. I grew up, I have engineers around me, my husband, my son's a computer engineer. And when I said, hey, show me how to do this, my kids, my husband, they do it for me. And then I can't do it. So
yeah, yes.
I gotta have somebody say, click here. And then once I do it 3 times, I'm good. So I'll take 15 minutes of your time sometime, I will. Anytime.
The hands-on part is really important. It's necessary to move and manipulate and watch how stuff happens or doesn't happen to reinforce the learning. I'm right there with you. It's what I love to do. Would be glad to work with you.
Thank you.
Any of
Allie,
you, actually.
I think you can reach out to any of us presenters via email or Twitter or whichever you would like to reach us.